Today, I'm going to talk about the air signs. Welcome back to Astro Talks. My name is Tara All. I am resident astrologer here at Sage Goddess. Today, when we talk about air signs, specifically we're talking about Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. One of the things for me that has been so helpful in my practice with astrology is feeling into and observing the elements in nature. Right? What does air do around us and in nature? What does fire do? What is earth and where does it show up? Same with water. Because a lot of what you can observe in nature is going to be what shows up in those different signs that hold those same elements. So, for example, air, right? It's kind of all over the place. We're breathing it, right? That gives you an idea of the flavor of that energy, which is very different, for example, than earth. That is, I can feel it, it's form, sometimes it's heavy kind of energy. So this leads me into the idea that two of the elements are more what we call yin or feminine, and two are yang or masculine. And it's the earth and the water that are yin, the more feminine. Feminine, nothing to do with female, just the receptive energy. But when we think about water and earth, that receptive yin energy draws in and down, right? That's how the energy moves. And when we think about air and fire, the yang, it moves up and out, right? So it's more subject to levity, whereas the earth and the water are more subject to gravity. Anyhow, so this kind of is bringing a bit of the elements together here. So let's just dive in then directly with air. So air, we sometimes call it the social and intellectual realm. It's about ideas and it's about thoughts and ideals, right? Things that are, possibilities or things that we can come up with in our heads. It's also about communication, right? Our social interactions with other people, and even like the conversations going on in our own minds, is part of the air element. So air in general, and this is true of all the air signs. And by the way, when we're talking about air signs, right, you don't have your sun sign doesn't need to be Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius for you to feel strong air elemental energy. That might be your rising sign, that might be your moon sign, that might be your Mercury sign, it might be your Venus sign. You might have a south node or a north node in those signs. Or the houses that are associated with the air signs, meaning the 3rd house, the 7th house, and the 11th house. If you have a lot of activity or planets in those houses, you also can feel an overabundance of air energy. So then that's just barely scratching the surface. I just say this because everybody has everything in their chart somewhere, right? Everyone has every house, every sign, every planet. The question is just where is it showing up and how big of a part of the story is it? So back to the air element, social, intellectual. It doesn't like containment, right? Air likes breathing room. It likes to be able to move around. It likes objectivity. So in general, the air signs, they're not as comfortable being bogged down, for example, in emotional type of stuff like the water signs might like to get into a little bit more. If it gets too messy and too complicated and we're really kind of, falling into some of those patterns of over dramatizing feelings, sometimes the air signs are less comfortable, right? They want to more kind of look and observe at how things are happening, have a rational conversation, be able to clearly understand, what facts are on the table is another thing to think about with the air signs. We also like to talk about compatibility. Water signs that want more of the feeling, the more depth, that are not as concerned with the factual, hey, this is what I actually said, this is what it actually means, and it is actually more tuned into how I feel about the thing. You can see how there can be conflicts in those areas. Or even think about from an air sign perspective, wanting to keep things a little light, lighter and kind of up above the surface, right? Keep a cooperative sort of, happy, balanced relationship. And so it's going to be uncomfortable getting dragged into things that, like I was saying, get complicated, or literally that just are kind of messy. We sometimes joke, with Libra, and I'll talk about each of the signs individually, but with Libra, it really does like pleasant aesthetics. It wants things to look put together and whatever its version of pretty is. And so that matters to a Libra. And so if a conversation is going too dark, going too deep, and it's feeling super uncomfortable and super emotional, that can be a trigger. A trigger to run away, a trigger to separate, a trigger to, whatever that particular response is in that person. But something to keep in mind. Yeah. And so if we think about fire and air, for example, just in nature, right, air feeds a fire. So you can put a fire sign and an air sign together and sometimes they're, everything's getting fired up and excited, Sometimes with the air signs, they can be stuck in their head a little bit. I worked at the university, a university for years, and oftentimes there'd be so many conversations, so many great ideas and researchers and innovation, right? You have these rooms full of doctors, but the conversations sometimes don't manifest into something, or someone doesn't actually take the risk to make the thing happen. So this is an example of where the fire signs, which we're not delving deeply into today, but this can give us a little perspective. The fire signs are willing to take a risk a little bit more, kind of go for it. So sometimes if the air sign has the innovative idea, then the fire sign can come along and say, let's go for it, right? Let's take the leap. Let's make it happen. There's that sort of boost of confidence instead of like a perpetual meeting, which can be an air sign kind of thing. And sometimes with air signs too, it's just a matter of overthinking things. Objectivity can be a beautiful, wonderful thing. And in fact, when we are taking it too personally and we're just too stuck in our own space and our own feelings and our own story, it oftentimes is the air signs that pull us out and say, hey, wait a second, have you looked at it from someone else's perspective? Have you stepped back, or have you moved up and out sort of that place you're stuck in to have a new vantage point, right? That can be a beautiful thing with the air signs. Again, about this thing about ideas and just kind of staying in the idea realm. Form can limit ideas. So sometimes an idea is so wonderful, and then you put it into practice and all of a sudden it's not what you wanted. It doesn't make you happy. Or maybe you absolutely hate it, right? That's an example of where you could see how it's easy sometimes to not want to pull the trigger into something becoming manifest, because then you're going to have to deal with what it turns into. So you can see why in some ways the air signs like to be up in their heads about things. The idea or the ideal can live there in sort of a perfect place. And when we put it into action, then we actually have to deal with. And when I say deal with, that brings in some earth sign type stuff, right? We manifest, we have to actually figure out what it is, we have to work with it. So this is why, for example, having an idea about a big project sometimes is a happier place to stay than trying to actually do the project. Yeah, so it can definitely get stuck there. Let's go into the individual signs, but before I do that, I'm going to talk about the 3 modes, or what we call modalities: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So every elemental triad has one of each: 1 cardinal sign, 1 fixed sign, and 1 mutable sign. Cardinal energy is about initiating things. It gets things going. So in the wheel, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn are cardinal signs. So you see there's 1 for each element. And they initiate what that element represents, in part. And then the fixed signs, they bring value, meaning, and purpose to whatever was initiated in the sign before them. So in the fixed signs, we're talking about Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, right? So fixed energy holds, contains, generates. It wants to do something with the energy that was sparked up or initiated, or just imagine this. Imagine you start running a race, right? That's cardinal energy. I'm off the start line. That's the fixed energy that actually has to hold it in place and keep it going so there's a chance to reach the finish line. And then we have mutable energy. The mutable signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And mutable energy, it's about getting relative perspective. It's adaptable. It's shifting. It is always the energy that moves from one thing to another thing. So in some ways, it learns to straddle 2 different worlds, or it learns to move from one thing into another thing. Now, one of the downsides of mutable energy is that energy can kind of be all over the place. It can be disorganized or a little crazy, right? And that's partly because like energy is kind of shooting all over the place. The fixed signs, they can be stuck and stubborn, right? Unwilling to move because they work so hard to condense or generate or to bring that value, meaning, and purpose that they're not going to move, right? I worked this hard to get this thing or build this thing. There's no way. So that's the shadow side to that. And cardinal energy can just not have follow through, right? Always on to the next best thing. Let's move forward. Let's do this. And it just kind of loses steam or loses interest when something already is out the gate. So you can see how all three of them together are necessary. So let's just launch right in, and I'm going to do them in the order of the wheel, these air signs. The first air sign in the wheel is Gemini. It's the third sign, and it is the mutable air sign. So this is about flexibility and learning and adaptability and curiosity. Gemini, we joke sometimes Gemini is the jack of all trades, right? Sometimes has its fingers in all kinds of different pots or projects. Gemini can be all over the place, can be scattered, can sometimes be like a big, espresso shots or something, because it has that sort of caffeinated, almost like buoyancy about it as it's like zinging around from, different things and interested in this and how about this and changing its mind. Gemini is so much about relating to the environment, and it's about language and interpretation and signs and signals, right? Which is why Gemini, people that have strong Gemini in their chart oftentimes are teachers, or they work with information, or they work with numbers. They oftentimes are talented in the ability to articulate, right? Or to write any of these different types of things around communication. Think about it's a wide range of communication, right? It doesn't have to be just written and spoken. Body language and all kinds of interpretation lies with Gemini. Same with like coding, right? I used to work as a medical coder in healthcare. That's a very Gemini thing. Taking a doctor's notes, changing that into codes that the insurance company processes and then pays a claim. Right? When we in metaphysics say this, for example, when we're taking angel numbers and giving meaning to them, that's a decoding. When you are working with nature and spirit animals show up, and then you're looking at those signs and what does that mean? And what does that symbolize or reflect or bring to my life? That's a level of decoding or translation. And honestly, if you work with crystals and herbs and all kinds of things of nature, and those things speak to you, and you're able to translate what energy or what messages they give to you, that's a Gemini energy. But Gemini, it's yang energy, right? I talked about how all the air signs are yang, meaning that in yang, I didn't really get into this too much. I guess I can go a little more. It is assertive, outgoing energy, right? So Gemini is constantly collecting more information, more data. It is ruled by the planet Mercury, but it's the part of that energy that's getting and getting more and more and more, right? So, that can be great, or that can short circuit the nervous system when it's too much information, right? So that's one of the shadow sides of Gemini. It's always finding something new, always finding something more, always looking into things, always needing to know the answer, find the answer. Because here's the thing, like our mind is a beautiful tool, but it's not the only thing we're working with. It really is a tool. It's not the essence of what we are. And Gemini sometimes gets so stuck up in the area of, information is my God, right? Or intelligence is so important, or getting the answer, or knowing what's going on, being able to report the news, becomes sometimes elevated above the intuition or the heart or the more, I would say, like soulful parts of ourselves. So that's just something to watch out with Gemini. Gemini wants to make sense of things. It wants that sort of logical, linear connection, right? To be able to categorize, to be able to name things, right? That's why it's so good with languages, able to put the little pieces together and to know what they mean. Yeah, to come up with just the right word at the right time. Now, sometimes people talk about Gemini and use the word fickle, right? Or just changing their mind, or sometimes, there can be links of like somehow being dishonest because they say one thing and then they do something else or change their mind. I mean, everyone has the potential for being dishonest, right? So that doesn't live with any particular sign, although some are more prone to that than others. I see it this way. Gemini is always getting more information. So oftentimes, I say I think something or I have an answer, and I just learn something else that changes the answer. It doesn't necessarily have to be I lied or changed my mind, in some sort of a negative way. It's just, hey, I learned something new or got more information, and now this is my new answer. Which you can see how though that can come across, especially if you're not like inside the mind of the Gemini, can kind of come at you as though it's a complete opposite thing, which leads us to the idea of duality with Gemini. Gemini is linked with the twins in mythology, Castor and Pollux. One was immortal and one was immortal. And so there's this idea of trying to reconcile the more rational side of ourselves with the more feeling emotional part that we just can't explain, or with the mortal and the immortal parts of ourselves. I like the word multiplicity better for Gemini than duality, because to me that's what it's really about. It's about having an open mind and seeing the multiple ways that things can work, or the multiple stories that lead to the one truth. Gemini, so air signs, social, intellectual, right, are the key words, and Gemini certainly can be chatty. But Gemini in many ways talks at you more than with you. Not saying this in any negative kind of way, but it's just that Gemini oftentimes processes out loud. And part of the process is to talk at you and have something to bounce off of to sort of find that space of knowing or find that new perspective. Yeah, but we joke sometimes. We also say with Gemini that words are like birds and they just fly right out of your mouth without thinking, right? Which is another thing about Gemini. It gets so excited about stuff. It's not always particularly thinking about what the impact is going to be. That can be part of it. But variety, Gemini, we joke also sometimes Gemini will try things at least once just to see how it turns out. There's that curiosity, the trickster element in there as well. Libra is the cardinal air sign, right? So again, cardinal initiates things. And in the intellectual, social realm of air, this is in big part initiating relationships. And this is why you will see people with strong Libra, their relationships and the people in their lives, and oftentimes their social connections or their connections with society, right? Or the things that are going on around them with other people are very heightened, because that's what's so important. That's what Libra is doing. Libra is learning to trust and learning to love and learning through the mirror of other who they are, right? I learn about who I am through my relationships with Libra. But this cardinal energy, think about just, there's a slight, all the air signs have commonalities, right? And they all get on pretty well with each other. That's true with all elements. Things in the same element tend to have an affinity. They form what we call natural trines with each other. But where Gemini, for example, is more talking at you, or can be, or processing out loud, Libra really wants the reciprocity. It's more apt to listen, and it's not just interested in the information, but interested in the other person and where they're coming from. You can see how Libra naturally leans into like mediation, counseling, therapist, any of these types of roles, right? Where there is trying to bridge or find a connection between people. Yeah, Libra also has a real attachment to fairness, wants things to be fair, right? So the law and legal things also come in with Libra. Again, imagine Libra is the archetype of balance, but all these little symbols or charms or necklaces you see for Libra, they always show like these perfectly balanced scales, which is so silly because the scales really should look like this, because Libra is about coming into balance. It's learning to find balance. And the way you find balance is by being out of balance and learning to shift and adjust to come into that place. So I sometimes tease the Libras in my life that they're the ultimate extremist sign, because they do. They swing back and forth in big ways oftentimes. Even in relationships, as much as Libra wants that, right? Libras want relationship, and they're willing sometimes to what I would call over-compromise to keep the peace and keep the connection in relationships, even when the relationship isn't really growing and feeding them, or those two people aren't growing and feeding or supporting each other. One of my teachers a long time ago said that, Libra cooperation, right? Or compromise, I think is the word. Compromise only works when two people are equally in it, right? Otherwise, if one person is doing all the adjusting, right, which Libra can do like a chameleon, right, trying to be different things and trying to contort or fit myself into a place so that I bring us into balance, right? That's not compromise, that's over-compromise, and over-compromise is sacrifice. And that's no longer the Libra zone, that's Pisces territory and a whole other conversation. But if you have strong Libra in your chart, you are wanting to find the sweet spot of what it means to be equal partners with someone else or other people. And equal, I don't mean people doing exactly the same thing 50-50. That's silly. I mean that if you average, for example, over a year in a relationship, let's just say it's you and me. Over the last year, I went through a really stressful time, let's say. About how much of the time were you there for me more when I really needed it? And then you look at the other side. How much was I really there for you? If there is some level of teaching or coaching in our relationship, do we do that equally for each other? Right? It might mean that like last January, I needed you a lot more. And you were there and maybe you gave up things in your life to be there for me. But maybe next month it's going to be you that needs it and I'm there for you. When that balance, average over time, is about 50-50, that's when you know you're in the Libra zone. Yeah, so that can be helpful for anybody who is working with Libra energy. Let me see what else. Oh my gosh, how could I forget this? So art, style, charm, grace. Libra is the interior decorator of the zodiac, right? Libra is usually well put together. It usually has a good sense of what colors look good, where things can be moved in the room to have, more feng shui, or even just feel better or look better in the space. There's that natural charm to Libra, like knows to come and refill your drink, for example, before you need to ask for it, right? Those are Libra type things. Yeah. But aversion to conflict can be there. I always say it's interesting. We tease Libra for like riding the fence and can't make a decision. But I think that it's not that Libra doesn't know what they want, because Libra it's naturally associated with judging. Social standards, personal standards, what you think is beautiful, what you think is not beautiful, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So it's not about not knowing what you want if it's Libra energy. It's the worry or the fear that if you step up and choose, ask for it, go for it, what gets lost? What relationship? Does conflict arise? Does something fall apart? Does someone look at you as not being agreeable and not being a quote unquote good partner because all of a sudden you step up and say, you know what, that's not pretty to me. I hate that chair in this room. Let's move it out, right? So that's what I say. Libra knows. You guys know this. If you're a Libra, you can look at someone, if they say, hey, do you like my sweater? It's going to be a yes or a no. It's not going to be a, I don't know. You're going to know whether or not you like it and whether or not you think it looks good on that person. So it's not a lack of being able to choose. It's a lack of actually stepping forward with those choices and being vocal and being comfortable and saying, hey, I am going to pick. Yeah. Balance is a weird thing because to balance, you actually need a certain amount of tension. So it's not an absence of tension. That's the thing. Like, we think that sometimes, balance is just completely relaxed or whatever. No, imagine it like a tightrope, right? If there's not tension on both sides, right, you can't walk on that rope. So in relationships, it's the balance. It's the right amount of push and pull. Where do you find the sweet spot? Aquarius is the fixed air sign. And so back to recap on fixed. Fixed wants to bring value, meaning, and purpose. It wants to really do something with the energy. So when we think about the air element, social, intellectual, what does it mean to bring value, meaning, and purpose to those areas? Well, this is where we naturally step into causes, innovation, progression for society, right? Things that make life better for humanity, stepping up, stepping in, sitting in, all these things that Aquarius is known for. It doesn't just want to have the ideas. It doesn't want to just initiate a conversation and then amass more information. It wants to know, what are we going to do with that information? How is that information going to bring value, meaning, and purpose that we can prove? All the fixed signs, they have growing and generating power. So this is why when we think about Aquarius networking, right? Working with communities or working with technology, working with things across great distances sometimes to bring all the energy together and do something with it. So this is kind of helps me understand that, what it wants. Now, Aquarius is also about liberation, right? It comes after the sign Capricorn. And so there is a certain element in Aquarius that's reacting to Capricorn. And Capricorn, of course, it likes the hierarchy, and it likes the rules and the regulations, and it likes to know how things are supposed to be done, and it likes people to be accountable, and it oftentimes has a real measure of how we're supposed to do something, which can be so valuable, right? But when we hit a ceiling, or when we decide this is the rule or the regulation, or this is how it has to happen, and that no longer actually works, it's old, it's crystallized, it's stuck, then Aquarius comes and it wants to break down that structure, right? It wants to free itself and life up to move in a more authentic direction to where there can actually be growth. And this is why in the tarot, the star card is associated with Aquarius, because Aquarius is the water bringer, not a water sign, the water bringer, right? It brings water and to actually rehydrate and bring life back to what has become too dry and what needs to bring back the hope and inspiration. Yeah. So Aquarius is also very much linked with hopes, ideals, long-term wishes, right? I sometimes call this the long game. What's your long game, right? What are you going for? Aquarius, that matters to that sign. And it wants to see those shifts and changes happen. And it also is the sign, it's the opposite sign or the polarity to Leo. So Leo is about the center of the solar system, right? Or the center of self, right? This is not in any sort of negative way. That's Leo's job. I am the center. I am at the heart of things. Aquarius is the polarity or the opposite. So it is about the entire cosmos or the whole solar system working together, which is really beautiful. I can't remember which tarot deck I have, but one in particular, it's got all the planets with these little silver threads connecting back, like to you as the individual. And that Aquarian energy is that ability to send and receive that intelligence and that information and that support and that healing in that way where everything is working together. So Aquarius is about the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It gives up the spotlight. It gives up the center spot for what is better for everyone. Now, that's not always easy. We've talked about this here at Sage Goddess in the context of the planet Pluto recently moving into Aquarius, and everyone gets excited. Oh, we the people, and no more big man at the top, and redistribution of power. But the thing is that when it is about we the people, that means that a good portion of the time you don't get what you want, because it's about what the majority needs or wants. And so that's something really to sit and to feel into with Aquarius. There can be also with Aquarius a sense of on the outside looking in, sometimes feeling different. They are oftentimes very intelligent or tuned into kind of future, innovative, inventive things, futuristic mind, and sometimes that means that they will know things or tune into things before everybody else believes it. So, we can look back and find famous people with strong Aquarius energy who either discovered things or unveiled things and the world wasn't ready for it. And then long after they're dead, now everybody's singing the praises, right? That's something that can happen. So if you have a strong Aquarius, just know that, that special lens, that special crystal lens, I always think of Aquarius. It's like this faceted crystal. And I look through it and I see things differently. And I see patterns kind of forming up all the way out so I can see the future, not in a psychic way, but literally just being able to put it together and see different prisms of light as well, which is really beautiful about that sign. Yeah, electricity can be very woven in here. It's interesting because Gemini, I mentioned this about Gemini briefly, but Gemini, the first air sign we talked about, ruled by Mercury, is very linked with the nervous system, right? And connections. And I didn't mention this, but Gemini is all about connecting things, which is why travel, right? And even getting from here and there. But think about connections in your body as well, right? Neurotransmitters, talk to this part, talk to that part. And that's how, messages come across, and that's how parts in your body know to do different things. Well, Aquarius is also linked with the nervous system, but just in a slightly kind of different feel. Actually, all air signs can kind of have that nervous system energy, but in particular, Gemini and Aquarius both can kind of have these jolts of electricity. And Aquarius can almost have these like strange insights or things that kind of come through the body. It can almost feel like a bit of a tremor or a shake, or just a little bit like something's a little bit off. And I think that's just because the frequency it runs on is not quite, with the rest of the common denominator, right? It's open to some different things. And so those, what we call strikes of genius that come through, can sometimes be a little offsetting to the human body and can kind of create that weird feelings in the nervous system. I hope that helps give you a little insight into the air signs. I can tell you this, that if you, any level with communication, any level with information, with language, with connecting, with even getting your mind, connected with your body, or your heart and mind body all together, air signs are really good for that, right? Moving between things, shifting things around, having the conversation. So if you feel any of these things that, I talked about here, if they feel stuck for you, just digging into those signs a little bit more can be helpful, or spending time with someone, or being in a place, or doing a type of thing that has these energies or vibrations to them can be really, really good medicine. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me here. If you love astrology as much as I do, if that's possible, I don't know, I'm really a geek when it comes to astrology. We have a Living Magic program here at Sage Goddess, and I have the honor and delight of co-teaching the Living Astrology class with Athena here. And so if you're interested, you can find more information that will be available here. It's sagegoddess.com/livingmagic if that's easier for you. Thank you so much.